What a moment, what a night for Holstein Kiel.
It's never a good sign when you see players getting lectured by supporters after a match, right? Well, Borussia Dortmund are sliding again. And I say again because despite the Champions League final papering over the cracks last season, Dortmund's campaign really wasn't great. European run aside, Dortmund still labored to a 5th place finish in the Bundesliga, only making it back into the Champions League for this season due to the Bundesliga's rankings within UEFA's club competitions. Any other season, and they would be in the Europa League. After coming so close to winning the Bundesliga the year prior, Terzic and the fellas were 27 points off of first place, and by the winter break, there were already murmurs that the players didn't really agree with Terzic's approach. Murmurs of Terzic getting replaced over the winter break came up, and even a strange rumor about a Marco Reus-led mutiny. That rumor was rubbish, of course, but where there's smoke, there's sometimes fire. Other times, something is just getting completely overcooked and badly burnt. Mismanaged, but not burnt to the ground, you know? The outcome of that season was Edin Terzic not continuing with Dortmund for the following season, aka this one. Instead, his assistant, Nuri Sahin, was handed the reins. Another homie hire at Borussia Dortmund. And here we are now, with Dortmund being in a similar place optics-wise. Last season, Dortmund were in 9th after 3 match days, but on average, didn't drop lower than 5th. This season, after 17 matches played, their average position is 6th, but have trended downward to 10th after 3 losses in a row, one more unforgivable than the others. At the time this video is being posted, in a couple of hours, Dortmund will go away to Bologna in the Champions League, with the media hypothesizing that this match will be make or break for Sahin in some ways. Avoid defeat, and you'll probably continue. Lose, and your fate is all but sealed. So how have Borussia Dortmund got to this point? What kind of decisions are being made at the squad, coach, and board level, or decisions that have been avoided in some cases, that have allowed Dortmund to continuously trend downward over the last season and a half? Now, as mentioned before, Nuri Sahin was chosen as the next guy behind Edin Terzic. Terzic was a man who divided opinion amongst Borussia Dortmund supporters, with some really backing him based on what he managed to do as a caretaker manager when he won the DFB Pokal in the 2020-21 season, succeeding Lucien Favre. Seems like ages ago at this point. He also led Dortmund to 7 consecutive wins to close out that Bundesliga season, which saw them jump up to 3rd. And so when Marco Rose was given the keys instead of Edin Terzic, some felt that he was snubbed, especially given how underwhelming Marco Rose was at Dortmund during that 21-22 season. Those who backed Terzic felt justified in doing so, felt vindicated. So with Rose only lasting a season, Terzic was called upon once again as the head coach of Dortmund, and he nearly had a historic first season, if not for his team's collapse on the final day of the Bundesliga. From there, after losing their top goalscorer Jude Bellingham, Dortmund put in a brutal title charge in the 23-24 season, finishing in 5th, but their play was much worse than 5th place worthy. They were dreadful to watch at times, despite you heard about their European run and everything. I'll yada 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 that part for you. With Terzic failing domestically, one of his assistants in Nuri Sahin was given the reins, continuing a recent trend of putting Dortmund dudes in charge. Is it a good strategy? Is it nepotism? For those who oppose this signing, they may think as much, as Nuri Sahin's experience at the top level of coaching was even less than that of Edin Terzic's. Nuri Sahin had some experience, but at Antalyaspor in Turkey, which is quite the difference. Sahin joined Antalyaspor as a player in August of 2020, and a year later, in October of 21, Antalyaspor's manager was sacked, and Sahin took over as a player manager. But 10 days later, he hung up his boots to coach full-time. He did very well from January to the end of the season, where his side went undefeated, climbing from 17th to 7th. He wasn't able to replicate that kind of form in his first full season in charge, however, as in the 22-23 season, Antalyaspor finished in 13th in the Super League, narrowly avoiding relegation. Things did look better in the 23-24 season, which Sahin departed in December of 23, by the way, to become Terzic's assistant, alongside Sven Bender, more Dortmund dudes, you know? When Sahin left Antalyaspor, though, they were in 5th place. Much better. In mid-June, Sahin was appointed as the Dortmund head coach. I should say this now. While Sahin is part of the problem with the decisions he has made, tactically, what have you, he isn't the only issue. He's sort of a symptom of the problems at Borussia Dortmund, and he's only one aspect of their issues. That said, he has had some notable matches in which he has shown his lack of experience. I mean, the first one that comes to mind for everyone, or at least for me, I'll speak for myself, is of course that match against what has been a Real Madrid side that is nothing close to their best, where Dortmund had that match in their hands before Sahin made defensive substitutions, changed formation, and really handed the game back to Real Madrid. But for some of the losses, let's take the loss against Holstein Kiel recently, the worst team in the league. While coaching is part of it, the fact that players are making errors that are supposed to be coached out of you by the time you turn 8 years old is just unforgivable. Conceding from your own throw-in, truly some U9 football stuff that a coach at this level shouldn't have to tell his players not to do. So when you look at everything at Borussia Dortmund, Nuri Sahin isn't central to all of their problems at the moment. And you can't blame him for accepting this job at a club that he loves, right? He has great memories there. The main issue comes from the board selecting him in the first place.
For Borussia Dortmund and Nuri Sahin, it's the worst possible start to 2025.
The board level is where much of the issues begin, in my opinion. The league position shows the true barometer of how the team has been playing, right? You just had Borussia Dortmund finish in 5th, 27 points from the top. 27! And you choose to ultimately roll the dice on your next head coach with an unproven guy like Sahin. I mean, he didn't even have his coaching licenses at the time. I honestly would love to have known what the meetings and decision-making process was like there, as it just comes across as nepotism hires. Sebastian Kehl looking out for his buddy, right? Instead of Borussia Dortmund looking at how their previous season was so poor and deciding to try to hire someone who would elevate them. There were major calls for Julian Nagelsmann, though he then ended up signing a long-term contract with the German national team, but inquiries should have been made to him. You know, they should have put a legitimate proposition on the table. Later, people looked to Fabian Hürzeler, who was doing fantastic things. I don't point to him as much as he was relatively inexperienced at the time, still with just 1.5 seasons as the head coach of St. Pauli, so I can understand the hesitation at the time. But he showed enough for Brighton to take a chance on him. They saw something in him, and look how it's paid off. These are the kinds of decisions that Borussia Dortmund used to make, they used to get right. Because if the intention is to be amongst the best teams in the country, to compete with the Bayerns and the Leverkusens, then your actions should match your ambitions, not just in squad building, but trying to procure the absolute best coaching talent possible. And as of now, they don't seem to be doing that. Doesn't seem to be a priority. Instead, Dortmund pulled off another homie hire, in which in both Terzic and Sahin's cases, you have to ask if they were the absolute best that Dortmund could have done for the sake of the club, or if those making decisions were doing what was best for their friends instead. But now Dortmund are at the point where you have to ask, at what point does Dortmund's condition in the league become so dire that they consider sacking Sahin? They're currently in 10th. So how much further do they have to drop, you know? I can understand why some supporters have stuck with Sahin, as it's not entirely his fault, like I've said. And why should he be the fall guy in all of this? I also understand why the board has stuck with him, as sacking Sahin is an admission of their poor judgment. And the questions I've been bringing up in this video would be loud and clear amongst the fan base. Was he the best fit? Did they give Dortmund the best chance at success, or were they just pulling off a Hail Mary kind of hire, maybe this will be our Guardiola or Zidane kind of hire, right? So we'll see what happens with him, but what makes his future murky is that with him having so limited experience in the top 5 leagues, he doesn't really have any credit in the bank when it comes to knowing whether he has what it takes to turn things around, because we literally don't know. He had a good second half to a season with Antalyaspor, then a brutal season where they finished in 13th, just 1 point above relegation to the second division of Turkish football. So you got to question, what did they see in him, right? All roads lead to the executive level, especially when it comes to squad planning. Dortmund used to be very good at it, but they have seemingly had issues in the center back and left back positions for a long time, as well as lacking anyone who can truly establish themselves as a good defensive midfielder in an effective way, leaving the back line often exposed. I feel like this has been an issue for a fair few years now, and yet this summer, with Hummels leaving and Niklas Süle often injured and unfit, they just brought in one center back, Waldemar Anton, meaning they went into the season with Schlotterbeck, who's good, Anton, who's good, and Süle, who nobody knows anymore, but mostly not good due to a lack of fitness. He's missed a ton of matches already this season and is due back at the end of February. So Borussia Dortmund went into this season with just 7 defenders in their squad. 7 players divided amongst a back 4 doesn't leave you a lot of options. You are without depth. You're essentially setting yourself up for issues, which is why Filippo Mane was brought in from their second team in this winter. With Marius Wolf leaving for Augsburg on a free transfer, Rami Bensebaini was honestly their only left back before 18-year-old Kabar was called up from the youth team again. At right back, you have Ryerson and the London Jan Couto, who has had difficulty establishing himself and some injuries as well. Then for defensive midfield, nobody was brought in. I guess Pascal Gross has come in, but he's more of an advanced midfielder in my book, despite being a great utility player that can slot in anywhere really. So you're left with Emre Can, who will often drop into the back line to split the center backs. And he's just sort of failed to inspire in the midfield. Good off of the ball, not good on it. So instead, Dortmund focused on their attack in this market, bringing in 2 forwards in Maximilian Bayer and Serhou Guirassy, given Füllkrug was sent packing to West Ham. Bayer has scored 3 goals in 23 appearances, and Guirassy has 13 in 22, 8 of which have been from open play. He hasn't scored from open play in the Bundesliga since November 2nd against RB Leipzig. He's shown some, I don't know if they're attitude issues, at least an unwillingness to buy in and fight, but that's something that the entirety of the squad could be accused of right now, which takes us to the next point, the lack of leadership.
It's time to say goodbye to Signal Iduna Park for Marco Reus.
Marco Reus and Mats Hummels are gone. Reus in particular will be missed. Not that Hummels was a bad leader or anything like that, as he's certainly incredibly experienced and brings a lot, but we saw signs of perhaps a lack of leadership composure when he spoke out against Terzic's approach prior to the Champions League final against Real Madrid. Now, when you look at Dortmund on the pitch, there's a clear lack of any kind of leaders out there. There's maybe one guy you could look to as a leader when it comes to both performance and how they conduct themselves on the pitch. Well, maybe 2 actually, now that I think about it. The first main one would be Schlotterbeck, one of the few really bright lights at Dortmund this season, of whom you can't assign much blame to when it comes to their performances. The other, Gregor Kobel, who again, you can't assign any blame to when it comes to the situation that Dortmund is in, right? That said, 2 of the players that have worn the captain's armband this season, in Emre Can and Julian Brandt, can be criticized. Performance-wise, Can has been a bit of a liability when he's on the ball, taking too long with his decision-making, trying to dribble out from the back at weird times, strange things like that. To be fair to him, he hasn't shied away from the media, he hasn't tried to hide. Brandt, on the other hand, has seemingly hid from criticism. It looked like he was back last season with some fantastic performances, but this season looks like the Brandt that Dortmund first purchased. Nothing close to when he was at his best for Leverkusen. He's now playing those silly passes again, he's making mistakes, he seems to shy away from any physicality whatsoever, and he becomes invisible far too often. His good matches haven't been able to make up for the invisible ones. Now, he's often scapegoated, which is a bit too extreme, I think, but when you're one of the leaders of the team, one of the captains, it's okay to expect more of these people. Now, of course, I'm not so naive as to believe that if they just changed who's wearing the armband, everything would be fixed, right? But right now, he's unfortunately a representation of how Dortmund as a whole are playing, meek and completely missing at times. So with 3 Bundesliga losses in a row and sitting in 10th, when you look at it all, it's quite clear why Dortmund are struggling. An inexperienced head coach, a team whose squad building isn't great. I mean, just as an aside, those Rashford links are not going away, man. What are you doing? Don't do it. And then on top of it all, no true leaders on the pitch, no real direction, and that habit of crumbling just won't go away. The outlook is potentially a bit scary. If Dortmund don't sort things out soon, that loss of European money will really, really hurt them. They're 7 points off of the top 4, 11 points above the relegation zone. So safe for now, but if things start to really slip, they could be in trouble. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully things will turn around for Dortmund soon, but they seem to have issues at the board level, and we all know how difficult those issues can be to shake out of the system. Players and coaches, hey, you can make changes relatively easily, but if the decision makers need ousting, that's when you're in trouble. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon for some Champions League coverage. Take care.